Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first curriculum conversation for 2026. My name is Bree. I have the great honour of being the president of the Museum and Galleries Education Network, and it's lovely to see so many of you come back from last year. That's really wonderful, and some new names as well. Um, we are going to be focusing on the topic of historic houses. And before we jump any further ahead, I would like to do a really sincere acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all located and pay my respect to elders both past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here with us today. I want to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And I think for all of us as museum and gallery educators, it's really important for us to think about what it is to work in sites that are on land that is and has been cared for by the Indigenous peoples of this land, the First Nations people. And it's been a place of truth telling and storytelling and education and culture, and for us to be present on that land and to acknowledge all of that truth making and storytelling and education that has taken place for hundreds of thousands of years, and what it means for us to be on that land. I would love for everybody, if you are able to type into the chat the name of the traditional custodians of the land on which you are located. For me, it is the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Thank you so much. I can see everybody typing away into the chat there. We are very lucky to have two speakers with us today. Both of them are actually on the Museums and Galleries Educators Committee. We have Rebecca Kummerfeld, who is joining us from Museums of History New South Wales, although she's just headed off to a new role, and I'll introduce her in a second. I'm actually going to start with our treasurer, Erin Jamieson. I hope that's okay, Erin. We're doing it in a different order. Erin is the education coordinator at the National Trust of Australia in Victoria. She has a deep passion for making history accessible and engaging for all. As a former secondary education school teacher, she uses her classroom experience as well as her love for history to develop hands-on and engaging place and object-based learning programs for students from prep all the way through to VCE. She holds a master's in cultural heritage and museum studies and a specialisation in collections and curatorship, which has been put to good use, I think, developing exhibitions and interpretation for learners young and those young at heart across the state. Erin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Bree. I'm just going to jump into a PowerPoint now, so bear with me for just 2 seconds. All right. Can everyone see that? Fabulous. Okay, so I'll get started. So I'd like to thank you all for coming today and kick off the curriculum conversations with a short presentation about the work of the National Trust of Australia here in Victoria. The National Trust is a heritage advocacy not-for-profit, and we celebrate and advocate for heritage places across the state. And we're also lucky enough to be custodians for 39 of them. Many of these places, the majority of them, are open to the public, from historic mansions to prisons to unique bushland and mountains to prefabricated iron cottages to tall ships. So vast variety of different places. We seek to share Victoria's story through both tangible and intangible elements of heritage. Of these 39 places, the National Trust currently run education at 8 of them, as well as offering incursions. We welcome an incredible 68,000 school-age students to our places each year for programs in areas such as history, geography, science, drama, and more. Today, I am going to be talking to you a bit about a new history education program we developed for Como House. So a bit of backstory. Como House was built in 1847 and it was originally a much smaller dwelling, but it had significant extensions added over the years. In 1864, the Armitage family moved in and 2 generations of the family lived there until the 1950s. In 1956, the National Trust was formed and Como House became its first acquisition, a decision that saved it from demolition. Since then, the National Trust has opened Como's doors to share with Victorians. The house was left as it was in the 50s, with over 95% of our collection being provenance to the Armitage family. This offers an incredible glimpse into the past. So at Como House, our education has long focused on the childhood years of the Armitage children in the late 1800s. The program then and now invites prep to twos into our house, into the house for the day, for a day of historical fun. They do the laundry, they explore the gardens, they play croquet and quoits, and they dance in the ballroom. This program has always been successful and very well attended, but for a long time, we've wanted to offer a secondary school experience for students so they can too visit the house for an education program. So, as some of you may know, the new Victorian curriculum was released in 2024 for implementation this year. So when that happened, I sat down and started to look and see whether there was any opportunity for new programming across the Trust's many sites. I came across these 2 points in the history curriculum for Year 9 and 10. And these points explore the experiences during and post-war, in this case, the First World War. And it made me remember the stories of the Armitage sisters, not when they were children, but when they were middle-aged women in the 1910s. They were all very involved in the First World War effort, with 2 sisters volunteering as ambulance drivers and nurses in France, and the other 2 donating their time and money to war-related causes on the home front. I thought this was a great opportunity for not only a secondary program at Como House, but also to amplify women's stories in a very male-dominated topic, which is the First World War. So, where do I begin? As many of you in long-standing organisations will know, research is often yet to be digitised. So I headed to the files at Como House and began to read. I also visited the University of Melbourne. Their archives hold a large selection of Armitage information. So I did a lot of analogue research. And then I very quickly realised that in order to tell this story accurately and to the best of my ability, we can't just focus on the years 1914 to 1918. To understand their experiences and how the sisters ended up where they did, I needed to look at their childhoods. For the Armitage sisters, this was a life of privilege. They lived across several mansions in Victoria and had servants and nursery maids to care for them. As adulthood struck, the regular path for women was not taken by them. So 3 of the 4 sisters that we speak about in this program never married, and the other was estranged from her husband from very early on in the marriage. None of them had children as well. This, as well as their wealth, gave them a level of freedom not experienced by married women or people of less means in this time period. Once war hit, their lives would change forever, and the war deeply shaped their lives after 1918. An example of this is the trauma felt by Constance, who's pictured there as a young girl. She slept with a rope at the end of her bed for the rest of her life because she was so fearful that she'd need to escape Como House, where she lived, in case of a fire. So there was a deep level of trauma there as well as the many sort of philanthropic endeavours that shaped the rest of their lives beyond that. So next question I had was, how is this program actually going to work? So working in heritage buildings is both amazing and tricky. So we work in incredibly beautiful places that can tell a story through every brick, every layer of wallpaper, and every room. But that also means we can't stick things on the wall and we can't change the layout of the house. We have very small spaces, very precious objects, and very delicate features. None of these are very conducive with a class of 30 Year 9s, as you might know. So it was no mean feat to work out how we could run this program in such circumstances. I first realised that students would need to split into groups. We couldn't fit 30 kids in the drawing room, for instance, so we need to split them into smaller groups. I then thought, since there are 4 sisters being studied, maybe they could split into 4 groups and each follow a sister through time. So I separated the story out into 4 parts for each of the 4 sisters. So that's Constance, Layla, Ada, and what's the other one? Ada. Across 6 stops in the house, starting with pre-war, then coming together for the announcement of war, then spreading back out to cover the war years and the post-war world. At the conclusion of the program, students would reflect on the sister that they followed and reconnect with each other, sharing the journey of their sister based on the questions on the screen about change and impact. So that's sort of the whole basis of this program. So these questions are reiterated throughout the entirety of the program. So all about impact, what impact she had, what impact the war had on her, and more generally on change. So what change did it have for women in general, and what stayed the same as well. So setting the program up was also a real fun job to have, as well as being able to tell the story through our tour guides and through storytelling. We have the unique privilege of holding a large amount of collection objects that provide primary evidence and context to the students. Things such as letters written by Layla in France, socks knitted by Laura for the Comforts Relief Fund, artwork painted by Constance, and photos taken by Ada all provide a tangible link with these sisters. Working with the Trust curator, I delved into our collection and managed to place many of these objects on display. As these objects couldn't be handled by the students, I've also made replicas of letters and things like newspapers and other paper documentation, which students could handle and collect as evidence to put towards their final discussion. Again, working with heritage objects, it means that sometimes we have to think a bit outside of the box for how students can have a hands-on experience. And this was our best way of doing that. So we officially launched the program at the start of the year after training and trials, and we're so excited to have the opportunity to share this part of Como's history, as well as welcoming secondary students to Como House for the first time. I just want to point out on the screen here, so these in particular are some of my favourite objects involved in the program. So these are paper bead necklaces that were made for Layla and Constance, who both volunteered in France, and they were made by the soldiers that they cared for. So it just goes to show what a big impact they had on the lives of those soldiers. And I think it's such a cool thing to be able to show students. And we've actually got replicas of these made so the students can actually touch them as well, which is really, really cool. On the screen, we've also got a little bit of feedback from our trial run of this program. I just thought I'd share that with everyone because we absolutely love being able to share this different side of history. It's adult women as opposed to the experiences of children, which is really, really cool. So that's me all done and dusted. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'll pass over to Rebecca now.
Thank you so much for that, Erin. Before we hand over to Rebecca, I'm just going to introduce her for those who have not come across her before. Before I do that, I've just put a note in the chat. We will have time for questions at the end. So store up your questions that you have for Erin and Rebecca, and we'll throw it open to you all at the end as well. But Rebecca, over to you. Dr. Rebecca Kummerfeld is Learning Manager at Museums of History New South Wales and holds an adjunct position at Deakin University. She has been leading learning teams in museums since 2015, leading at the Sydney Jewish Museum and the North Lincolnshire Museum. She is an author and regular presenter at conferences with a background in teaching, research and management. She creates engaging and memorable museum experiences for a wide range of audiences. She crafts narratives that connect audiences meaningfully with historical events and perspectives. Rebecca works strategically at the intersection of history and education, developing projects that promote critical thinking and empathic understanding. Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks, Bree, and thanks everyone. Sorry, I had a bit of a mishap because as Bree sort of mentioned earlier, I'm actually finishing my role at Museums of History and taking a year secondment to work for a small educational not-for-profit, which means I'm in lockdown of my Microsoft Teams. So my husband's very generously logged on. So I am not Ian Osterhoff, despite what the screen name says, because it doesn't let you change it. But he's a teacher, so it counts, right? He's also a science teacher, which is why all his backgrounds have something to do with space. But we won't hold that against him. All right. Erin, we didn't talk about what we were going to each contribute here, but actually I think we've done, it's been really nice because I took a really wide view and I think you took quite a specific view, so it maybe works nicely together. But I just wanted to share, no, it's not flipping slides. Here we go. First, an acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from Gadigal Wangal country, and I wanted to share something that I really, and the team at Museums of History have thought about a lot, which is that when we acknowledge country and we think about what country is, it's not just what we walk on, but it's what we walk within. And many of our historic buildings, including this brick that comes from the archaeological collection from First Government House, which is the archaeological remains under the forecourt of the Museum of Sydney. And this brick, you can see in it is the imprint of a eucalyptus leaf. So this is one of the objects actually currently on show in the Unearthed exhibition, which is about the archaeology of that site. And Aaron, the curator, Dr. Aaron D'Souza, talks a lot about how he thinks about the process of colonisation and how this brick is very symbolic of that, that when the colonists arrived, they dug up the clay to make these bricks and then they fired them. And in doing so, they changed this material forever, because once you fire a brick, you can't unfire it. You can't put it back into its clay form. So to think about what country is, and the fact that many of the buildings, the historic buildings that I have worked in for the last 3 years, are actually made of country also, whether it's clay from Gadigal country or Durrag wood that was felled on Durrag land and brought into the buildings, or the shells, the oyster shells that were used in lieu of lime. Our buildings are country too. So Museums of History, I think I've spent the last 3 years explaining where I work to everyone that I meet. I'm sure many of you know what Museums of History is, but we work across 12 different sites, including the State Archives. There are many historic houses and other historic buildings. The learning team work across 7 of these. So we work at Elizabeth Farm, Hyde Park Barracks, the Justice and Police Museum, Marugal, Museum of Sydney, Rouse Hill Estate, Susanna Place, Falkleys House. So some of them, and like Erin mentioned, some of them are really either not curriculum aligned enough for us to work on, or the spaces just don't allow us to take students into them because they're very restricted. But I thought I'd just give you an overview while this video plays, kind of giving you some vision on what it is that we do at Museums of History. We have 17 different programs that we run across those 7 sites, from stage 1 up until stage 6 students in New South Wales. So that's year 1 all the way up to year 12. And in those, we see about 56,000 kids each year. Most of those on site and some also online. In every program that we run, we try and be place-based. So we're really thinking about connecting the children who come to us with the place that they're on or in, and helping them to think through the layered history of those sites. And I'll come back and talk about that a bit more. We're looking at sensory engagement, object-based learning. We include a lot of role play, and we're obviously always trying to be curriculum aligned. And so in each of our places, the way that we approach education shifts depending on what the place is and what the curriculum alignment is. So you're seeing the Justice and Police Museum, you were, and there we do a lot of our high school legal studies programs, whereas here at Susanna Place, which is a series of workers' terraces. Oh, we've got someone.
I haven't missed too much. Most of what they're talking about is house museums.
Oh, Brietta, thanks, Bri. So yeah, I've lost my train of thought, but that's okay. So a lot of our different sites will invite different types of programs, and I'll get into that a bit more on the next slide. oh, here's Rouse Hill. We should look at this because there's some really lovely imagery. Rouse is where we run a stage 1 program that explores this historic farm, but also there's a historic schoolhouse. So students are invited to participate in a role play and go back in time and experience school like it was in 1889. So you see them here dressing up, and they all get allocated the name of a child who went to this school, and they participate in lessons. So it's a really, really, really popular program that's sort of that immersive learning, and enables kids to think about their own experience in school and how it might be different from kids in the past. We have some washing too, Erin. It's like a historic house thing. So I'm going to flip to the next slide, but that gives you a bit of insight into the many different places that I've worked on. And just to sort of underpin it with those pillars, so every program that we run, like I said, we're trying to be place-based. We're trying to think about what is unique about this place that students are coming to. I think we all know as museum educators, you're trying to do something they can't do in the classroom. And so each of our sites has its own character, its own personality, its own layers of history that we'll tap into. We're learner-centred, inquiry-based, like most museum education. We're trying to meet our students where they are and then connect them to the next layer of learning. Curriculum linked, which has been really interesting for us because of the new New South Wales curriculum coming in this year and next year. So this has been a real moment of evaluation, of thinking through what's been working as we rewrite almost all of our programs. And then we strive to be object-based and hands-on as much as possible. Our audience at Museums of History, I think of it as a pyramid where I have stage 1 at the bottom as the largest cohort, and then stage 2 slightly smaller, 3, and so on. So what that means is that the type of learning we're doing is appropriate to those really young students, and we're thinking really carefully about how to connect them with the past, and often that's in really tactile, sensory ways. So I thought I'd just go into a little bit of detail, but I'd love for you to ask questions. So this is really just to hopefully spark some thoughts for you. I'd much rather answer any question you have, even if I haven't covered it here, than to ramble on. But just in terms of place-based, this is something that in some of our sites has been really interesting and challenging. So Hyde Park Barracks has many different moments in its past. It was obviously built as a convict barracks by Governor Macquarie. That was its original purpose, but it also spent some time as a depot for largely female immigration. A lot of Irish migrant women came here as part of the Earl Grey scheme and went through the barracks. And then it was an asylum for destitute women for a period as well. And then after, and the period we actually don't look at in the museum display, it was a law court. And so how you tell those many different histories, and of course, it also had a massive impact on First Nations communities, because a lot of the convicts who were housed in this barracks were then sent to the frontier. So we have in the museum display one section about Mile Creek, because most of the perpetrators of that massacre were convicts, many of whom who came through the barracks. So yeah, how you tell those layered stories in 90 minutes in a hands-on engaging way is a really interesting challenge, and one that the team's been playing with, especially because we're developing a new stage 4 history program for the new core in the New South Wales curriculum, which looks at colonisation and its impact on First Nations people. And then the way that we do place-based learning somewhere like this, Rouse Hill Estate, where our primary audience is stage 1, is totally different. And so here you see them learning to dance around the maypole, and like I said, that they're learning lessons from the past. It's very experiential, it's quite immersive, and we're asking children to sort of wrap themselves in history and think about what it's like by doing it. So different approaches depending on the site. Learner-centred, we're always trying to let kids lead. We have some pretty structured and carefully coded programs, just because the challenge of running programs across 7 different sites is a really interesting one also. How do you make sure you maintain a quality and a consistency so that a school coming twice in a year will have the same experience? But how do you also meet them where they are? So we do work training our delivery staff, and we think about how to balance those competing demands. Inquiry based. So we love students to go on their own learning journey. Here they are learning to sew in the sewing room at Rouse Hill, and they do get some instructions, but then they take this home and we encourage them. We have a QR that sits on the back of these sewing squares, and we invite their parents to join in and think about how to sew. A lot of kids have never sewed before. I mean, they're arriving here at age 6 or 7, and this is their first experience of this. Object-centered. So I think, Erin, you touched on this. When we think about object-centered learning, there's lots of different ways to do it, and I'm, preaching to the choir here. In some previous roles I've had where I've been working in sites that have collections that need to sit behind glass, the way you do it is in front of a showcase. But because primarily we're working with really young students, we're often trying to use replicas when we're doing object-based learning. So here, or actually these are original leg irons, so objects that can be handled. So these leg irons get passed around, and that enables kids to do things like feel the weight of them, think about what it would have been like to wear them, and engage with different senses in their body, which is a really lovely way to inspire questions. And finally, like I said, hands-on. So this goes hand in hand with that object-based learning. This is a photograph of Elizabeth Farm, and one of the beautiful things about this site is that nothing is provenanced in the collection. It's all either replica or of the period, but purchased. And so you can touch everything. You can sit on the couches, you can get into the beds, and it just means for children, it's brilliant. You don't have to be stuffy. Other sites we have, you can't touch anything. So there's this feeling of being relaxed for the facilitators, but also for the students, because they can get hands-on and think through what it was like, with their hands, which kids love to do. And so, yeah, just finishing where I started, which is just to go back to the many different sites. I haven't talked about them all. And I think one of the biggest challenges for me in this role has been getting my head around all these different places and different histories, connected but different. And so, yeah, if there's any questions you have about that or about the operational side, I'm also happy to talk about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your presentation. And Erin, I might get you to pop back on screen as well. So we'll open the floor to some questions, and people feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'll field questions for our two presenters. While some questions are coming in, I thought I might kick it off with a question, which is, you both sort of presented similar sort of sites and programs, and I would love to know what the challenges of the programs are, particularly if it would be interesting to know if they're similar across your two sites or if you face different challenges. So yeah, over to you.
Do you want to go first, Erin?
Yeah. So I think some of the main challenges I sort of touched on a little bit in my presentation. It's small spaces. So how do we field a whole class of 30 students in a small space? It's what you said, Rebecca, not being able to touch a lot of things. So whether we make replicas of things or how do we get around that. Of course, there are objects that we can touch, and that's such a privilege. We do this incredible program at Labassa Mansion, which is all about our fashion and dress collection, which can be touched under supervision in certain situations. So that's with senior students, and we get them to don gloves and actually look at these garments up close and personal. And we've found that the level of engagement when they're able to do that is so much higher. So any opportunity to be able to touch stuff, to see really cool things. And also it's a bit of that behind the scenes. No one really gets to see this normally, which they love as well. But yeah, I think also another challenge that you briefly touched on as well, Rebecca, was that we are somewhat limited with the stories we tell, because these houses or these places tell a certain history, and that might not be curriculum aligned. So again, it's the case with many of our sites that they don't quite tell a story that is conducive with the curriculum here in Victoria. So that means that we either have to get a bit creative with what sort of program we're running. So we might step out of history and go into geography, for instance, and look at the place through that lens rather than a historical lens. Or we just focus on the places that tell those sorts of stories. So like I said, Como House, we've got that sort of what was it like to be a kid in the 1800s story, which is really great for lower primary. But then we've also got that other layer of history, that World War One story, that gives us an opportunity to hit a different area of the curriculum, which is really cool.
Yeah, look, I think we have lots of similarities. Definitely small spaces is a common theme. I mean, most of the places that I've worked across are built for a domestic scale. So there's something beautiful about that too, though, because a kid comes in and it's not intimidating like a typical museum space. You're not walking up through a big pediment with columns. You know, you're walking into a home, even if it's a home that's maybe grander than the one that you occupy, although some of them aren't. So I think it's not intimidating. So there's pros and cons, but definitely some of our smaller spaces. The other thing I'd say is some of our sites have really limited indoor space. So we make use of the outdoor spaces, which is awesome. But if there's torrential rain, that's really, really challenging. So, you know, if anyone knows some millionaires who want to like build education centres in the grounds of some of these places, I think that would be a great idea. But yes, it is very limiting. And then yeah, the ones like Vaucluse House has a provenance collection, so you can't touch anything. You're sort of behind rails. And it just makes it hard to engage. Like you said, being able to feel free. And I sometimes think it might not even be the kids that are finding it hard to engage. I think it's when you're a facilitator and you kind of have to have eyes in the back of your head. You're thinking about the safety of the collection as much as you are about the people in front of you. It just makes for a different experience. You know, my team have just recently launched, and I think some of them are on here actually, but Lucy Melville recently worked on a program at Susanna Place, and it just launched earlier this year, and it is teeny. Those rooms are teeny. And there's Lucy Heim. And those places are really, really challenging. The paint is flaking off the wall. It's so tactile, and every 7-year-old wants to touch it, you know. So engaging with kids in these spaces while also looking after the collection is just a really tough gig.
Speaking of this idea of something that's difficult or something that's tough, we have a question from Elsie in the chat, which is, how do you frame such tactile, immersive engagements with history in ways that are mindful of the existence of difficult pasts? It's a great question.
So I think a really good example here is not necessarily a house museum, but one of the places that we look after is the old Melbourne Jail, which has a very deeply traumatic history for many people, including First Nations people. And I think the way that we tell stories at the jail really depends on the audience of those stories. So we invite students as young as year 5, that's the lowest we'll go there because of the nature of the site and what happened there. So it was a site of execution, it was a site of imprisonment for many First Peoples, and deeply traumatic for many people. So our programming for grade 5 is very, very different to our programming for VCE legal studies, for instance. So for grade 5, we focus on stories that are age appropriate. We base that on, you know, knowing the age of those students and what they can handle. We also read the room, you know, every school is different. So we definitely train our facilitators a lot to understand what sort of reactions you might get from students. We speak to the teachers beforehand. We say, hey, what would you like to hear? What would you like to not hear? And we try and tell the history in a way that students will be able to both understand and, you know, acknowledge the difficulties of it, but we also make it very clear, you know, this doesn't happen the same way anymore. We don't do executions in Australia anymore. And we keep it very factual. We don't try not to put too many emotions into those really difficult stories because that can be quite traumatizing for students. Whereas for VCE legal studies, we obviously tell a very different story. So we talk a lot more about executions and the impact that a place like this had on different people throughout the years.
Yeah, I guess it's a really great question, and I know your background is linked to Holocaust education, which is why I think you might be asking it. But my time at the Sydney Jewish Museum was so formative in how I think about this, and I think Holocaust education has a really well-established pedagogical framework for dealing with difficult histories. ask Brie about it. She's amazing. But I think a lot of what I learned in my time there about, bringing kids safely into difficult histories and safely out. So thinking about the narrative arc that you create in a program, not just in the literal narrative, but in the emotional arc that you're taking them on, being really deliberate about that. Thinking about, I think it's important not to shy away from difficult information, especially when kids are asking for it. I don't think it's ever helpful to gloss over it. But I do think we need to make sure we're always building in reflective time to give kids the opportunity to decompress and to think through what they've heard. Sometimes that's not always best done with a museum educator who they've only just met. Maybe it's good to pass them on to a teacher they trust. Maybe it's a combination. To be honest, I think it's something that Museums of History, we've been working on for 3 years, and there's still places we could improve that. Some of our programs explore the challenges of First Nations colonial history really effectively. I would say that our programs at Museum of Sydney that were created in collaboration with a First Nations Dharawal knowledge holder, Dr. Shannon Foster, are a really beautiful exploration of the tensions and also cooperation between First Nations people and the first contact moment with the colonists. But I think there's always space to improve. Actually, I think kids often teach us. One of the best things that happened last year was we did some early trials. So I told you about this Stage 4 program we're creating at the Hyde Park Barracks. We decided we had an opportunity to bring some Stage 4 kids in from a local school, and we took them into the gallery spaces we were planning to use, and we just kind of said, go for it, wander around, listen to the audio guide, and then we asked them a series of questions. And what they came out with, their insights with literally no intervention from us, was really stunning. And these are 13, 14-year-olds. It's amazing how much our kids bring to this and how reflective and thoughtful they are. So the other big takeaway I've had is just to trust them and let them lead you and guide you in what they need.
I think that that's a really beautiful concept of the idea of duty of care. And duty of care, we often think about as something that is, quite stringent in terms of child safety, but duty of care in that relationship of being an educator and guiding them through that. We have so many different questions coming through. The next question is from Kate, and Kate wants to know how you evaluate your programs, particularly with the students.
Yeah. So in the past, we have had funding for different programs where we have been able to do a more formal evaluation process. But I feel like the best evaluation that we get from students is seeing all the work they do when they get back to class. So we have teachers emailing into us. We do a very big package of different activities and things that kids can do when they get back to school and pre-visit and all that. And we get teachers emailing in saying they did a whole project on the Pollywood side, which is a tall ship down on the Yarra River. And I think that just goes to show the impact that these sorts of programs have. The constant feedback from teachers, just in a general sense, is it is the highlight of their year. And when we invite a different group in, who, whether it be a grade 1, a year 7, year 10, we know that that is often the highlight of the year, because when I think back to my time at school, I think about the excursions. They were the best times. And it's me, history nerd, obviously, thinking back to when I was at school, like going to these historical sites was the absolute highlight, and it honestly led the way for where I am now. And I think that sort of impact, and even if it's just 2 kids in the class thinking that they learned so much about the Pollywood side, they want to go home and research more, they want to learn more about old tall ships from the 1800s. I think that's really, really special.
It's the evaluation question is a great question, and it's one that I never stop asking, because I sort of am never satisfied. But I'll tell you where I've gotten to in the last 3 years. So when I started at Museums of History, we had a QR survey that we encouraged teachers to do. No one did it. It was really poor response rates. So we went back to paper. Paper surveys from teachers were telling us what we already knew. It was mostly really complimentary, which is great. Like, they love the excursion. Like you say, Erin, they'd say best day of the year. But that, I want meat. Like, I want them to tell me what's wrong. I don't want them just to tell me they loved it. And if they did love it, I want them to be specific. So I went through a lot of iterations of questions. And then the thing that shifted things for me was I listened to, I'm sure a lot of you listened to the Art Engager podcast with Claire Bown. She did an interview with Sita Sargent, who runs She Shapes History. And Sita talks about how she evaluates her programs, her tours, sorry. She runs a women's history tour guide company in Australia. She's awesome. You should follow her. But she talked about how she got her facilitators to do a self-evaluation at the end of each tour. And that for me was like a light bulb moment, because in terms of getting student feedback, we do a little reflection. Oh, thanks, Brie, you're great. We do a little reflection at the end of each program, and we'll anecdotally ask what the kids enjoyed or what questions they had, but we were never capturing it beyond the sort of lived in the brains of our facilitators, some of whom, we might not interact with because we work across so many sites. So what I did was I made the front page of the evaluation for teachers, and I kind of tweaked the questions to a point where I was getting more helpful stuff, including my new favorite question. You can all have it for free. What was the impact of this excursion on your student learning? Something about the word impact shifted the way they answered the question. Anyway, really useful data there. But the back page, we changed to be for the facilitation team to take 5 minutes out, and it's good practice, reflective practice. Sit down and document. We all do it. When we've led an excursion, you're all sitting there at the end kind of talking about the weird kid who did weird things, or the amazing question that you got, or like the parent who kept interjecting. And so I wanted them essentially to document that discussion. And so there's some leading questions, but there's also some space if other things come up. And we also recorded those student reflections from that end section. So the other thing that I'm really fortunate is that we have amazing part-time staff who have it built into their role description. They actually type into SurveyMonkey all these answers, so we can also take the paper into a way that we can analyze it a bit more deeply. But that has been a game changer, that back page, in terms of getting insight, not directly from students. It's still filtered through the eyes of the facilitator, but it's really valuable information.
I feel like evaluation is one of those things that we all know how important it is, but it's often so rushed. And often as museum educators, I feel like we're the people, when people come to us for evaluation, we always fill it out because we know how useful it is. But maybe our next curriculum conversation should be on evaluation, because I think that that's something that...
And you should do it, Brie.
Oh, don't drop me in it. That's not very fair.
Brie has great evaluation.
I think evaluation is something that's hard to get buy-in, and it's hard also to know how it works well with students and with teachers, and what you're gathering it for. And so I think that maybe we should have that for our next one. But put a pin in that thought, because we have another question, which is from Julia, who has asked, is there a particular area or activity within the house museums that you create and educate within that is particularly popular or resonates with your students, and what does it evoke for them?
Yeah. So I'm going to go all the way around to the Mornington Peninsula and Macrae Homestead for this one. So Macrae Homestead is this incredible old homestead from very early days of colonial involvement in the area. And part of that is we have a kitchen in the property. And one thing that the students love more than anything else is getting to make butter. They love the hands-on nature of it. They love that they get to take it back home as well. They get to take it back to class. And one of the things we give them in the teacher resource pack is a recipe on how to make damper to go with your butter. So it's a really great way for them to, I think you said the phrase earlier, Rebecca, doing history. And I think that's a really good example of that, because we basically bring them back to that time in history in the early 1800s when, you know, in order to get breakfast on the table, it's not as simple as ducking down to Coles or Woolies. It's, you know, such a process. You have to go out, you have to milk the cow, you have to bring the milk, you have to separate out the cream, you have to do all these different steps. And the students really love the tactile nature of it, for one thing. We don't use an original butter churn. We have a modern one that's all safe, but we have examples of what the butter churns used to look like. And we sort of go through the process with them, and it takes a while. And while we're doing it, everyone gets to go at churning it. You sort of explain to them, like, you know, you've got to do this, but then you've also got to make the bread. You've also got to get the meat or whatever you're having with the bread and butter. And I think that's something that they absolutely adore, because it's a physical activity. And when we're looking at this history, it's young students, so prep 1, 2, sometimes 3 and 4s as well. And yeah, I think that is incredibly popular. But I will say as well, sort of based on the last question, talking about what they remember, the number one thing for all of our sort of then and now, what was life like in the past programs, the thing they remember most is the toilets. I'm not sure if everyone else has the same experience, whether it's a chamber pot or a weird looking outhouse or something, like they will remember the toilets. So yeah.
Yeah, so true. We have a chamber pot reveal moment at the MacArthur's house, Elizabeth Farm, that also is very popular. It's funny, there's 2 things that stand out to me, and these are the things that people who come back to the museum and will report to our front of house sort of 20 years after their visit. It's always sensory stuff. Like you've said, whether it's they made scones or butter, they churned butter, or they did the washing. They used to run, before my time at the High Park Barracks, sleepovers where they'd all sleep. I don't know how much sleep happened, but they were in the hammocks on the top floor. And I think those really immersive moments are memorable. We get a lot of kids who do the schoolhouse program at Rouse Hill, and they remember Miss Fox, who's the teacher who teaches them in that immersive program. And some of our deliverers live in the area, and they'll be walking through Coles and they'll have children yelling, Miss Fox, which I just think is adorable. But all the way up, you know, one of our facilitators has been around for 17 years playing Miss Fox. And there are now adults who bring children of their own and say, I remember you, Miss Fox. So I think immersive, sensory, you can't go wrong. Really, really memorable. And emotional, I guess. We know, like, there's pedagogy, or there's like studies that show emotional engagement makes things more memorable. So anything, I think that's where the toilets come in. It's very exciting. So they're emotionally charged moments.
It's something they can relate to as well. And I think
totally,
that's what all these things have in common, you know, like we all go to school, so we know what being at school is like. We all go to the toilet. We all have breakfast, lunch and dinner. So it's all these things that you can relate to.
I think that's the thing, right, is you don't change minds or teach or you know, make impact with facts and figures. It's with storytelling and connection. And I think that that's all why we're in the roles that we're in. We're going to start to wrap up. But before we do, I would just like to throw an idea out there for all of you who are on the call with us. We just threw out an idea of the next session, the next curriculum conversation being on evaluation. But love to hear from all of you. If you just want to pop in the chat any ideas that you have for our next session, we'd be really keen to hear them. Any sort of, if it's a particular a practice like evaluation, or if it's a particular type of site or museum you would like to talk about, if it's something else in particular, just pop it in the chat and we'll talk about it at the committee as we're planning our next session. Before we officially wrap up, I just would like to thank both Erin and Rebecca for presenting to us today. Really, thank you for, I know we're all rushing towards Easter and the end of term. So also thank you to everybody who made time this afternoon for logging on. I think it's always wonderful to get inspiration from these sessions and know how many of us there are out there, you know, working with our students every day. So thank you all for logging on. Have a wonderful break. Have a safe Easter. And we will see you all for our next session. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.